No one remembered when the ferry last stopped at the dock. Not exactly. There were stories, of course, thin as spider thread, whispered across counters at midnight diners, or tucked inside the sleep mutterings of the old. The kind of stories that began with my grandfather told me, and ended with a shrug, a laugh, or silence, but always the same image. A boat, black, long silent, moving without weight. It didn't sound its horn. It didn't take passengers. It simply waited, and when the fog was just right, thick enough to blur the trees but not the stars, some said you could hear the gentle splash of its approach. Not loud, not close, just there in the water. Familiar, like footsteps you can't quite place. Marla stood at the end of the dock, hands in the pockets of her coat, breath blooming white into the night air. The lake stretched out before her, frozen flat under the skin of midnight fog. Around her, the woods waited with that peculiar stillness found only in cold places. No wind, no birds, only the groan of old ice shifting beneath the surface. She didn't know why she was there, only that she'd woken, dressed, and walked the 2 miles to the pines with a strange certainty that the ferry was coming. Not like a dream, not like sleepwalking, just understanding, as if something she'd forgotten had surfaced suddenly and demanded she arrive. The dock creaked beneath her. She looked down, bare wood, no footprints, just her own, behind her, already disappearing into frost. Ahead, nothing, only the dark horizon. And then, a light, far off, yellow, moving low across the surface, like a lantern hung too close to the water. It didn't sway, it didn't flicker, it just approached, slow as breath. Marla's hands tightened in her pockets. She felt it again, that low, tremoring knowledge deep in the chest that says don't run. Not because you're brave, but because it wouldn't matter. The light grew larger, then clearer, then resolved. A boat, yes, but not a ferry. Not anymore. Its hull was long and narrow, like a barge from another century. No name along the side. No signs of crew. Just a long metal shape, painted matte black, with a narrow staircase descending into its center like the spine of something sleeping. It pulled up to the dock without sound. No rope, no anchor. It simply stopped. A ramp descended. Softly, quietly, as if gravity had remembered it. Marla stepped forward. Not because she wanted to, because she already had. Some part of her remembered this motion, this step, like a breath remembered in the ribs. The deck was dry, dustless. Inside, lanterns lit the hallway with dim, pulsing gold. She stepped past them, down the stairs, into the hold. The walls narrowed, the air thickened. She passed row after row of old bench seats, passenger style, but each one was covered in a thin veil of cobweb, like no one had sat there in years, or centuries, or ever. Marla reached the end of the hold. A door stood before her, iron, narrow, seamless, no handle, just a word carved in tall letters. Observation. The moment her hand touched the metal, the door dissolved. Mist poured out, and inside, the sea, but not the lake. Something deeper, something moving, and far across its surface. Shapes, floating, not boats, not animals. Houses, dozens of them, old, familiar, lit from within, each of them drifting like lanterns on the dark. And Marla remembered, suddenly, she'd been here before. Not in this body, not in this life, but she'd taken this ride, and gotten off, and forgotten. Behind her, the door closed. Ahead of her, the ferry began to move. The ferry moved with no sound, no engine hum, no churn of water, no roll weight behind it. Marla stood in the observation room, though it was more like a corridor, a long glass-walled gallery staring out into an impossible sea. The air tasted faintly of dust and citrus. Not unpleasant, just old. Outside, the houses floated in silence. Each one drifted slowly across the surface of Black Sea, lit from within by a gentle amber glow. Their styles varied. Some looked Victorian, with pointed roofs and shuttered windows. Others were squat and square, made of red brick or crumbling wood. But every one of them shared the same haunting familiarity. like dreams remembered days later, blurry and out of sequence, yet undeniably yours. One house passed particularly close. It was small, no larger than a cabin. Its siding faded blue and chipped at the edges. A porch swing hung loosely from one side, drifting gently as though stirred by wind. But there was no wind, no movement in the sea, only the soft glide of time. Inside that house, a figure stood in the window, not moving, just watching. Marla leaned forward, her breath fogged the glass. The figure was tall, thin, wrapped in something dark, maybe a robe, maybe hair. She couldn't see its face, but the shape was so familiar, like the negative space left behind when someone you love leaves a room. And then, the light inside the house went out. The fairy didn't stop. It never did. It simply passed. And the house, now dark, began to sink, quietly, gracefully, like it had never meant to float in the first place. Marla stepped back from the glass. The sea outside rippled faintly, a low, creaking echo to the walls of the ferry. Something structural, something living. She turned toward the opposite wall, where a narrow brass speaker was built into the iron plating. It crackled softly, and then a voice like wind under a locked door, spoke. You boarded without a memory. You may remain until one returns. Marla's pulse slowed, not with fear, but with the weight of confirmation. Somewhere inside her, this had always been the truth. Somewhere deep in the folds of her thoughts, the shape shifted. Half a face in a mirror, the last word in a dream, the moment before waking. Lost, but there, the speaker buzzed again. Next approach, 17 minutes. Observation may be adjusted. Do not attempt to engage. Some passengers do not remember their homes were never on land. Marla blinked slowly. Something about that last sentence scraped against her ribs. A sentence-shaped key sliding across the door of a locked room inside her. Homes not on land. She stared at the sea again. Some of the houses were upside down, their windows submerged, their chimneys exhaling long, thin tendrils of white smoke that curled upward into the sky like signals or pleas. One house spun slowly as it floated. It had no doors, just windows, all of them open, and from inside, curtains drifted out in patterns that didn't match the water. They waved. No, not waved. They reached. Marla turned away. The room dimmed. Lights along the floor flickered. The speaker let out one last click, and a final sentence came through, softer than the rest. You may want to sit down. The next one might recognize you. And then, a bell, far away, a chime, mournful, like the kind churches use when there's no service. Just remembrance. Marla moved back into the main corridor of the ferry. The hallway had shifted. It was longer now. A turn where there hadn't been one before. The walls bowed inward slightly, as though the ship were bending under pressure or expectation. She followed the path. At the bend, a new door had appeared. Wooden, no label, but a single brass plaque above it read, "Your stop." The doorknob was worn smooth, used. She didn't reach for it. Not yet, because from behind it, she heard something. Not movement, not music. A sound she hadn't heard in years. A voice, her voice, from when she was a child, saying, "Let me in, I forgot my name again." And then, a knock from the other side of the door. Not frantic, not desperate, just patient, rhythmic, like a heartbeat trying to remember the body it belonged to. Marla stepped back. Behind her, the hallway was gone. Just wall, no lights, no escape, only the sound of the sea growing louder. And the knock again, 3 times. Soft, hollow, remember me. The knock came again. Not louder, just closer. It no longer sounded like it was on the other side of the door. It sounded like it was within it, as if the wood itself had lungs. And something inside them was breathing her name. Marla stared at the brass doorknob. It had no rust, no markings, only a faint warmth that hadn't been there a moment ago. Her fingers itched, aching to reach for it, not because she wanted to go through, but because it expected her to She didn't touch it. Instead, she leaned in, pressing her ear to the door. Silence. Then, a whisper, so soft it might have been imagined, "We saved your room." The words were hers, not someone mimicking, not a memory. Her voice, small, young, just on the edge of crying. She jerked away. The ferry creaked around her, a low groan passing through the bones of the ship like breath through ribs. Somewhere far off, another bell rang. Not the toll of arrival, something deeper. A call and response. A chime answered by something below. Marla looked over her shoulder. The hallway had changed again, now lined with mirrors, tall, warped, unclean, each one set at an angle just strange enough to catch her movement wrong. When she turned her head, her reflection moved a moment later, not like a mirror's delay, like hesitation. She reached out to touch one. It was warm, not glass, not quite skin, and when she drew her hand back, it left a faint smear of something red. Blood? No, ink, still wet, and in its center, a spiral, faint, drawn lazily, as if by a child's fingertip. Just once. No beginning or end, just motion. The mirrors began to hum. Soft, not a sound but a vibration, a tone you feel in your teeth, not your ears. The door behind her clicked, not open, not locked, just aware. She turned back to it. It had changed, no longer wooden. Now something older, like petrified bone, yellowed and smooth, knotted with veins of gold. The plaque above it was gone. In its place, a small paper tag, nailed crookedly into the frame. A name, Marla Veeden, guest returned. She hadn't seen her last name in years. Hadn't written it down since the accident, since the water. The name pulsed faintly, ink sinking into the wood like roots. She reached for the doorknob. This time it was cold, not metal. Stone. Her hand didn't stop. It turned the knob as if pulled by a dream. The door opened with no sound. Inside a hallway, not part of the ferry. This was different. Low ceiling, slanted walls. Wallpaper torn in strips along one side. A faint light flickered from overhead. One of those long rectangular fluorescents you find in hospitals or schools, half broken and stuttering. She stepped through. The air changed. No longer damp with lake fog, but dry, stale, like a room closed for too long. The hallway turned left, then right, and opened into a room she knew instantly. Her childhood bedroom. Exact. Down to the stuffed bear on the dresser, the box fan in the window, the poster above the bed, half peeled, showing a girl on a bike, pedaling into a foggy forest. The floor creaked beneath her. The room breathed, not just in feeling. The walls expanded and contracted, just slightly like lungs. Marla stepped forward. The bear turned its head. Not fast, not humanly, just slid, like it had been tracking her all along, and finally decided to let her know. Its mouth opened. Inside was a mirror, not a shard, a full one, circular, about the size of a teacup, nestled between its plush teeth. Her reflection blinked, and did not match her, not fully. The hair was right, the face, but the expression was wrong. Too calm, too still. The reflection reached out, as if touching glass from the other side. Marla leaned in. The bear said nothing. The room trembled, and from under the bed came a sound she had not heard since she was 7 years old. A slow, deliberate scratching. Something with patience. Something that never forgot where she used to sleep. The door behind her slammed shut. The knob vanished. Only the mirror remained. And her reflection, now smiling. The sound didn't stop. Not when Marla turned away from Bear. Not when she took a step back. Not even when she pressed herself flat against the bedroom wall. Trying to breathe small. It was not a frantic scratching. Not like nails scraping in panic. It was deliberate, measured, slow. A drag, a pause, a drag again, as if something just below the bed was tracing symbols into floorboards, trying to teach the wood a new language. The air smelled like cedar and something older, like wet paper or a forgotten cellar. Not rotting, just remembering. Marla stared at the bed. It hadn't changed. Same thin legs. Same faded yellow bedspread. The corner still curled under from where she used to kick it in her sleep. The scratching pause. Then a low tap, 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 right on the mattress. She could almost feel the rhythm in her knees. 3 taps. A breath. Then 2. Like a code. Or a knock. And in the silence that followed, something slid into view from beneath the bed. A hand. Small. Pale. But too smooth. No fingernails. No wrinkles. Like it had been sanded down. Skin polished flat. The fingers moved independently. Not like a child's hand reaching, but like an insect testing the air. Marla didn't move. Couldn't. Her body locked in the shape of someone trying to be invisible. Her shadow froze on the wall beside her, then twitched. She glanced at it. It twitched again, but she hadn't moved. The hand under the bed turned palm up, and resting in its center was something small and dark. A marble. No, a pupil. A perfect black sphere, glinting faintly in the stuttering overhead light. It pulsed. Once. Then again. Marla knew that if she touched it, something would open. Not in the room. Not in the floor. In her. A memory she had locked years ago. The real reason she couldn't hear thunderstorms without crying. The real reason she'd never been able to look beneath beds. Even as an adult. The hand waited. Patient. She looked at the bear again. Its mouth had closed. The mirror now rested in its lap. Her reflection still stared back, but the smile was gone. Now it was crying, not weeping, just tears, slowly sliding down the glass, pooling in the curve of the mirrored surface. She turned her head. The hand had retreated, not back under the bed, but into it. The mattress twitched once, a slow sag forming in the center. The bed inhaled. The blankets fluttered. Marla heard a voice she hadn't heard since she was a child. If you're not asleep, she knows. The voice had come from inside the pillow. She reached forward. The moment her fingers touched the bedspread, the mattress deflated like a lung. The entire frame collapsed inward with a wet, choking sigh. Gone. Just an empty hole now, sloping downward into darkness. Stairs descended. Narrow. Stone. Lined with flickering lamps, though no flame, no heat. Just a glow like forgotten ideas. Above the staircase, a word painted in dripping black. Underhome. Behind her, the bedroom window shattered, not with violence. It simply split, folding open like a door, revealing a stretch of ocean where the backyard used to be. Black. Still, a single house floated nearby. Her house, but wrong. No walls, just scaffolding and doors. Endless doors, each one bearing her name. Marla turned back to the stairs. They waited. Below, a sound began to rise. Not scratching now, not knocking, but a lullaby. Faint, off-key, a child's voice singing something that might have been her own invention. If you sleep and she walks past, don't breathe fast, don't breathe fast. If she sees your eyes are wet, she will ask what you forget. Marla stepped onto the first stair. The door above sealed shut. Light died, and the song continued. The air was wet, not with water, with sound. Each stair Marla took echoed not outward, but inward, as if the steps were whispering back to her through the soles of her feet. Beneath the echo came a second rhythm, a distant ticking. Slow, hollow, like a grandfather clock buried under a mile of loam. She had lost count of stairs. They turned gently, curving downward in a spiral, so smooth it felt intentional, purpose-built but not for people. The walls were tight and close, made of dark stone that pulsed with warmth. Sometimes the glow from the lanterns flickered, and she caught glimpses of things behind the walls. Outlines of rooms that had no depth, silhouettes of windows with curtains fluttering in windless dark. Still the lullaby continued. Off-key, child's voice. Louder now. If your hands begin to hum, she knows you know where she came from. If your breath begins to spin, she already pulled your double in. Marla stopped. Ahead, the staircase ended in a wide arch. Beyond it, a low room carved entirely of stone. The walls had no seams, no corners, just a slow organic curve of something that had grown this way, like a root system hollowed by time. The ceiling was low and dripping with condensation, which gathered in small basins along the floor, each one shaped like a cradle. There were dozens of them, carved into the stone itself. Some held water, some held ash, some held toys. Marla stepped into the room. The lullaby stopped. Silence at last. Not comforting. Anticipatory. The far wall was covered with drawings. Childlike. Drawn in thick black crayon. Some in red. Some in both. Figures standing in a line. Stick-limbed. Round heads. All with circles for mouths. Open. Screaming. Singing. It was hard to tell. Beside them, a larger figure. Always larger. Its arms too long. Its hands dragging on the floor. No face. Just an empty oval. And one word. Scrawled again and again over its chest. Sometimes misspelled. Mammer. Marla stared at the name. Felt it pressed against her ribs like something trying to get out of her lungs. She knew that word. Didn't know how. But she did. It had lived in her for years. In the way she flinched from mirrors in the dark. In the way she hated basements without reason. In the dream she couldn't fully remember. The cradles began to tremble. Just slightly. One by one. The toys inside them shifted. An old rag doll turned its head. A tin soldier raised a chip bugle with cracked lips. A plastic bear lifted its paw. All of them pointed to the far corner of the room. A low stone door stood there. Round. No handle. Above it, scratched deep into the wall, a warning. Do not knock unless she knocks first. The stone was stained below the words. Not blood. Ink, maybe, or shadow. Marla stepped toward it. With each footfall, the temperature dropped. The air grew heavier, but not with pressure, with presence. She reached the door, raised her hand, paused, not out of fear, out of memory. She'd done this before. She'd stood at this very door, hand raised, listening for the echo, and it had answered, not in sound, in shape, a shape in her mind that hadn't left since childhood. Long arms, open mouth, the faceless bend of something tall in the room, always bending down to fit, a whisper behind her ear, cold and familiar. She doesn't want in. She wants you to come out. Marla turned. No one there, only her shadow, except now it had no head. The lullaby returned, but not sung, played, on something plucked, off tune, out of time, from behind the door. She pressed her palm to the stone, and it melted, not violently, not fast, like snow giving way to spring. Inside was a narrow hallway, sloping up. The walls were painted white, too white, hospital white, and on the floor, tiles, checkerboard, black and white, with one tile near her foot slightly cracked, leaking something green. She stepped inside. The stone door sealed behind her. No sound, no seam, just gone, at the end of the hall. A mirror, full length, framed in rusted gold. In its reflection, not herself, but a girl, 10, maybe 11, sitting cross-legged on the floor, covered in dirt, humming a song Marla couldn't hear. The girl looked up, smiled, and said, "She left your face in my room. Do you want it back?" Marla opened her mouth to answer, but the girl's expression dropped. Flat, blank, and then she stood up inside the mirror. The glass began to bend inward, breathing. The mirror pulsed again, not with light, but with breath. The surface bowed inward as though the glass were made of skin, inhaling slowly, dragging the room into its lungs. The girl inside stared at Marla, but her eyes had changed. No whites, just a deep slate gray, still almost painted on. The kind of eyes a doll might wear when it wanted to learn how to blink. The air in the hallway thinned. Marla tried to move, backward, forward, it didn't matter, but her legs had anchored themselves, not frozen, just rooted like the floor had remembered her weight. The girl in the mirror cocked her head. Her mouth twitched into something like a smile, but stretched too wide and too flat, like it had been drawn there with a ruler. "You don't remember me?" she said quietly. Her voice was wet, like it had been filtered through water or something much thicker. It didn't echo in the hallway. It echoed inside Marla's chest. The girl raised a hand. So did Marla's reflection, but it wasn't her hand. The skin was younger, the nails too neat, no scar on the wrist, no freckle near the knuckle. Not her, not anymore. The girl whispered, "I remember you when you didn't close your eyes. I remember the first time you knocked on the floor under your bed. I'm what you left behind when you climbed out of me." The mirror began to crack. Hairline fissures spiderwebbed across the glass. Slowly at first, then faster, snapping in bursts like distant gunfire. But no shards fell. The pieces stayed in place, quivering, trembling with breath. And then a second face appeared behind the girl. Taller, longer, no features, only smooth skin. Pale and stretched like wax across a shape too narrow to be a human head. Its arms were wrong. Too many joints. Elbows where none should be. Hands the shape of question marks, twitching in place. The girl didn't seem to notice it, but Marla did. Every nerve in her spine did. It leaned down behind the girl's shoulder and whispered into her ear with a voice like a dying fan. "Tell her to open the door," she swallowed. The mirror shattered, not outward, not inward, sideways. The shards slithered apart like leaves in wind, and the girl stepped out. Real now, wet footprints trailing behind her on the tile, leaving tiny flower-like stains where her toes touched down. Her eyes were completely black. Not evil, not empty, just other. The girl held out her hand. In her palm, a doorknob. Oh, brass, still attached to a splinter with no bigger than a dinner plate. But Marla recognized it instantly. Her bedroom, the door she'd once locked herself behind. The night, the scratching got too loud, and no one else in the house believed her. That door had been ripped open by morning. She had blocked it out. Until now, the girl pressed the knob into Marla's hand, and when she touched it, the hallway vanished, just blinked out. She stood in darkness, the kind that doesn't move, doesn't breathe, waits. Then, a pop, like a cork pulled from a wine bottle, and light spilled in from beneath her feet. She was standing on a platform of doors. Dozens, each one a different shape, age, material. Some wood, some iron, some glass, all sealed, except the one she stood on. It was her old bedroom door, laid flat like a bridge across a chasm of total dark. Below it, nothing, no sound, no gravity, just the impression of something far below. Turning its face toward her, the girl stood beside her now, staring down. She said softly, "When you left me here, I was afraid, but she taught me how to wait." Marla looked at the girl again, and finally understood. It was her, not a reflection, not a memory, not a ghost, the version of herself who had never come out from under the bed, the one who'd stay behind, curled in shadow, whispering back to the scratching, trying not to breathe too loud. That self had grown, twisted, matured into something strange, but patient, a watcher. The girl stepped back into the dark, one foot, then the next. She didn't fall. She sank, like ink dropped into deep water. Her last words floated up to Marla like bubbles. She remembers which pieces you gave away, and which ones you stole. The platform trembled. The doors around her began to open, upward, from beneath, as if something was rising to knock. Each door shook, a rhythm spreading outward, synchronized like breathing lungs, and then the one directly ahead of her creaked and began to open. The door in front of Marla didn't swing open. It peeled like old wallpaper, curling slowly upward from the bottom, its hinges groaning like they hadn't moved in centuries. Behind it, a hallway, but not like the one in Underhome. This one was real, too real, familiar. The air smelled like boiled potatoes and lemon cleaner. The floor was linoleum, beige and scratched, the kind they use in public buildings, schools, hospitals, municipal offices. On the far wall, a corkboard covered in flyers. One of them bore her name. She stepped through the door. Her feet made no sound. The world beyond the door felt slightly off kilter. as if gravity worked at a slant. The hallway stretched further than it should have, narrowing as it went, the overhead fluorescents buzzing faintly with age. Each bulb flickered in its own rhythm. Tick, 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 tick. She approached the corkboard. The flyers were faded and torn, corners curling away from their thumbtacks. Most were for lost pets, community potlucks, piano lessons. But at the bottom, pinned at an angle, was a flyer with no contact info, no border, just 3 lines of black ink. Do you still sleep without a face? We remember your room. Knock when ready. She touched it. It felt warm, not like paper, like skin. She recoiled. The hallway lights blinked, all at once. The walls trembled slightly. Not an earthquake, just a breath. The building inhaling, remembering it still had lungs. She turned. The door behind her had closed. Its doorknob slowly receded into the wood, like an eye closing. Now there was only forward. She walked. With each step, the walls narrowed. The corkboard reappeared. Not a second one. The same one. Flyers untouched. Still tilted. Still warm. Marla swallowed. Something was looping. Not time. Not space. Memory. Each repetition of the hallway brought something new. This time, the floor tiles bore footprints. Small ones. Bare. Still wet. The next loop, the lights were dimmer, and the corkboard flyers had names scratched out with red pen. By the 4th loop, the sound joined her. Footsteps, not behind her, not ahead, above, like someone walking along the ceiling, heavily, slowly. She didn't look up, not yet. The hallway stopped looping on the 7th pass. The corkboard was gone. In its place, a mirror, a tall, rectangular slab bolted to the wall with rusted brackets. It reflected the hallway behind her, but nothing else. Not her. She stood in front of it. Her reflection didn't appear, but something else did. A bed. A child's bed, too small for an adult. The blankets were shaped with the outline of a sleeping body. She watched. The blankets rose. The shape sat up, a figure with a stitched-shut mouth, eyes sealed by black thread. Its hands were pressed flat against its thighs. It didn't move, until it did. One hand lifted slowly, and pointed, right at her. Marla turned. The hallway had gone dark, except for a rectangle of light spilling from beneath a new door at the far end. She moved toward it. With each step, the air around her changed. Duster, cooler, familiar in a way that made her stomach ache. She reached the door. The light beneath it flickered. A faint radio static came from within. She opened it and walked into her old bedroom. Again, but this time it wasn't a replica. It was hers. Truly, every detail exact. From the chipped dresser knob to the rip in the curtain, where she once saw lightning carve a tree in half. The radio on her nightstand crackled softly, tuned between stations. It whispered, "You're not supposed to see it twice." But she was still hungry. On the wall, the closet door creaked open. Marla's heart went cold. She remembered when she was 10. She used to stuff things in that closet. Not toys, thoughts, fears. She'd write them down, crumple the paper, and throw them in there. She believed that if she wrote them down fast enough, she could keep them from becoming true. One night, she wrote, "I think something else lives in my skin when I'm asleep." And the next morning, her reflection blinked before she did. The closet door opened wider. Inside, paper, thousands of crumpled sheets, stacked chest high, and just behind them, a face, not hers, but wearing her, taller, older, eyes black with thread stitched across the lids. Its mouth slowly opened, and the voice that came out was her own. "Aged, afraid, you weren't supposed to come back, but you left too much behind." Marla stepped backward. The closet widened. The walls of the room began to bulge inward, pulsing with breath. The radio went dead, then whispered, "You'll sleep again." Just not all at once. And behind her, a knock. The knock came again. Not behind her, within her. a hollow reverberation inside her chest, like someone rapping gently on the back of her ribs. Not painful, not loud, just insistent. Marla turned. Slowly, the bedroom was folding, literally folding in on itself, like a cardboard box collapsing in reverse. Corners creasing upward, floor rising, walls pulling inward as though trying to return to their flat-pack beginnings. And through the gaps in the folding room, she could see other versions of the same space. Reflections at first, then alternates. One room was scorched black, everything burned and brittle. Another was soaked, furniture warped and swollen, wallpaper sliding off in long wet sheets. Another had no ceiling, just open sky, nightless and pink, with enormous eyes blinking slowly above it, watching. In every version of the room, a closet door stood open, and in every closet, something waited. Not identical things, but related. Each version of her, older, younger, stitched, shadowed, stood inside, staring out at her with the same expression, a strange sorrow, like they had all expected her, and were disappointed that she'd come alone. Behind Marla, the air bent, not sound, not touch, just pressure, folding inward like breath held too long. She turned back toward the voice from the closet. The figure that wore her face stepped forward. Its stitches had unraveled, black threads trailing like veins of ink across its jaw, down its neck, into the collar of a dress she hadn't worn since she was 9. It held something in its hand. A jar, glass. Inside, a swirling mist, dark and slow. Marla recognized it without understanding how. A nightmare, one she had swallowed, forgotten. The stitched Marla unscrewed the lid. Mist curled outward. It didn't rise, it crawled, dragging itself along the air like it was made of fingers. The air turned cold, then sharp. Marla stepped back, but the room spun, literally, floor to ceiling, left to right, as if the entire world was tumbling over itself to reposition her. And when it stopped, she was no longer in her bedroom. She stood on a train platform, empty, silent, lit by greenish lamps that buzzed like insects. A single bench, a cracked vending machine, a clock overhead, hands spinning backward. The sign above the tunnel mouth read, "Exit, if you haven't yet." The rails glistened like they were wet, though the air was dry. No train, no sound of one coming, just the echo of footsteps, hers, though she hadn't moved. She turned. The closet door was still there, floating in midair, slightly ajar. The stitched figure stepped through after her, still holding the jar, still smiling her forgotten smile. But now, others followed behind it, a parade of near Marlas, silent, shifting, some of their faces half missing, some with extra arms, one entirely made of smoke. They gathered around her, formed a circle. She could feel them breathing. Not air, thoughts. Every breath they exhaled pressed memory into her skin. The time she stood at the lake's edge and thought about walking in. The first lie she told and felt relief. The night she dreamed of being buried beneath her own house and woke up laughing. The stitched one held out the jar. Its voice was different now. All voices. Later, you dropped this. You always do. We keep them so you won't forget who you're becoming. The jar pulsed in the stitched hands. Marla could feel it in her throat, the desire to take it, to reclaim. The other Marlas leaned closer, whispering things she couldn't quite make out, bits of dreams, half-formed regrets. One of them said, "If you hold the jar, she'll stop looking for it." Another murmured, "But then you'll have to be her." And a third, just behind her, breath cold against her ear, "We only ever become what we lose." The jar floated closer. The mist inside began to take shape. A room, a mirror, a door without a knob. Marla reached out and stopped. Her hand hovered an inch above the jar. A single thought entered her mind, not her own. What if I already took it, and this is her giving it back? The stitched Marla smiled, then opened her mouth too wide, and from it spilled a slow, humming tone. No language, just invitation. The train platform lights flickered. The tunnel at the far end pulsed. A light was coming. Not a train, not something on rails. but something enormous, something that used to have a shape, but forgot. The Stitch figure held the jar to her chest and began to walk backward into the closet door. The other Marlas followed, one by one, whispering, dragging parts of her memory behind them like coats too heavy to carry. Marla stood alone again. The tunnel light grew brighter. The noise of something dragging through wet gravel echoed closer, and from the tunnel, a voice called out, "You missed your exit. We'll offer another." The closet door snapped shut, and above her, the sky opened. The sky did not part like clouds. It unzipped. A long seam across the blackness above Marla's head split open. Teeth of light pulling apart like the mouth of a sleeping thing that had been disturbed. From within, not stars, not sky, knots, an endless weave of threads, each moving like worms through cloth, tightening and loosening with breath. Some were red, others gold, most were black. They formed patterns that changed when she blinked. Symbols she almost understood, like handwriting she'd never learned but always recognized. The train platform vanished. No flash, no sound, just gone. Marla stood in a vast, open plain, smooth, shiny, a surface like obsidian, stretching in all directions beneath the knotwork sky, and all around her, mirrors, hundreds, maybe thousands, not on walls, standing freely, framed in black and silver, each one exactly her height, each one reflecting a different version of her, some older, some cracked, some faceless, some covered in ash or frost or crawling insects made of paper. None of them moved, except one. To her left, 3 mirrors down, a version of her slowly raised a hand. It waved, not with joy, not beckoning, just acknowledging, like it had been here longer than she had. And now she was simply caught up. She moved toward it. Her reflection in the glass shimmered. The other Marla stood barefoot, eyes wide and stitched shut like the Stitch girl from earlier. But this one wasn't smiling. Her lips were sewn too, but curled down at the corners in a kind of restrained sob. She raised both hands and pressed her fingers against the glass. The mirror bowed inward, warping as if it were made of warm water. Marla placed a palm against it. The other's fingers felt real, warm, matching her. And then a pull, soft at first, then stronger, not from her hand, from her mind. A tug behind her forehead, like the mirror was reaching into her memories and trying to reel them in. She tried to pull back. The mirror followed. It stretched forward, the frame creaking, and began to pour itself into the space between them like syrup. From the depths of the glass came a whisper, not in words, but in sensation. She felt a birthday she didn't remember, a song she forgot she'd loved, the warmth of her mother's hands, then the absence of them. The mirror began to speak in that silence. She took your name. She folded it into another and left you with a shell. But names are like threads. They unravel when forgotten. Marla stepped back. The mirror stopped, but it left something behind. A long, black string, hanging from the center of the glass, like a single thread pulled from a tapestry. It swayed faintly, and from the sky above, a single knot uncoiled and descended. It met the thread from the mirror, touched it, and fused. The ground below her opened. No cracking, no breaking, just absence. She fell, slowly, gracefully, like a leaf sucked downward into a well. Below, a house. Not her house, but made of her rooms. A patchwork of places she had lived or dreamt she lived. The hallway from her first apartment, attached to the bedroom she had when she was 6. Connected by a staircase from a hotel she'd only been in during a dream she hadn't told anyone about. The house swayed gently as she landed in it, like a boat caught on memory's tide. The walls breathed, the windows blinked. The air smelled like dirt and lemon and fabric softener. And something sang. No voice, just melody, played on teeth. Plink, plink, plink. Pause, plink. She followed it, through a narrow door at the base of a twisting corridor. At the end, a room with no walls, only curtains, billowing, all around her, thousands, each one stitched with a word. She stepped between them, The words brushed her shoulders. Her arms. Sister. Absent. Taken. Split. Returned. And finally, Mammer. A curtain blew aside. Behind it, a crib, empty, but swaying gently. And behind the crib, a shape, tall, thin, arms too long, head bowed low, almost touching the floor. No eyes, no mouth, only a face made of folds, like cloth wrapped too many times around something fragile. It rose, with no sound, and turned toward her. In its hands, it held her name. Not written, not spoken, just present. And without speaking, it offered it back. The room dimmed. The knotwork sky above began to unravel, and the creature's arms opened, waiting, not for an embrace, for a decision. Marla didn't take a step forward. Not at first. The tall figure, Mammer, waited with arms extended, long fingers holding something not visible, not tangible, but so palpably hers that it hurt to look at. It wasn't a name in the traditional sense. Not letters, not sound. It was a feeling, a shape inside her that had once been whole. A childhood thought long buried under layers of denial, adult logic, and half-remembered lullabies. And now it hovered between them, as delicate as smoke. Behind her, the house of memories creaked, not in decay, in anticipation. The swaying crib gave off a soft chime each time it rocked. Plink, pause, plink, plink, like a coded warning. Mammer did not move. It never blinked, never breathed, but its stillness was more terrifying than any motion could be. Marla reached out, tentatively, toward what it held. Her fingers trembled, stopped an inch away. The air around the thing buzzed faintly, like a sleeping phone in a deep pocket. She heard a whisper, not from Mammer, not from the house, from inside herself. You left me behind, Marla. And I grew teeth. The words came from deep below her voice box. Not speech, more like a release of something long held down. Mammer tilted its head slowly, not judging, just acknowledging. She remembered a story, half real, half invented, about swallowing thread as a child. She had eaten a sewing kit ribbon, thinking it would make her dreams tie together. The thread never came out, until now, a pressure in her throat rose. Slowly, she gagged, but did not panic. She understood. Something inside her was ready to surface. With a breathless sob, she opened her mouth and pulled a string. Fine, black, damp. It came out inch by inch, unspooling for her throat as if it had been stitched into her spine, winding its way through her thoughts, keeping things in place. Her knees buckled. Mammer watched without judgment. When the last of it emerged, the thread began to twitch in her hands like a live wire, humming faintly. The moment the final inch left her lips, the house stilled. The curtains froze mid-sway. The crib stopped rocking. The word Mammer blinked out from the fabric, and the air became heavy with something waiting. Mammer lifted one hand, not toward her, toward the thread. It reached down and brushed the thread gently with a fingertip. Instantly, the thread stiffened into a line, straight, taut, and led downward into a hole beneath the crib. Small, dark, the size of a crawl space or a grave. Marla didn't question. She stepped toward it. She didn't crawl. She folded, her body compressed, not painfully, but willingly, as if the laws of her bones had relaxed, allowing her to become what was needed. The hole accepted her. As she descended, the walls grew narrower, made not of wood or stone, but of names, etched in tiny handwriting, repeating over and over, as if someone had spent years carving every version of her into the roots of the world. She passed. Marla Veeden. Marla V. Mar. M. And then the name stopped. In their place, she who knocked. The air grew colder. Not freezing, just sterile, like a hospital hallway long since abandoned. She emerged in a small chamber, no larger than a closet. At the center, a mirror, round, silver-framed, covered in veins of ink. Marla stared into it. This time, the reflection matched perfectly. Every scar, every blink, but no expression. The reflection stared at her, waiting. Then it spoke. Its lips did not move, but the words came loud and clear. You were born inside a knock, and raised by what waited after. Marla touched the glass. It felt like breath. The mirror liquefied. Her hand passed through. On the other side, a room, bright, blinding. She stepped through and found herself in a hospital bed. White sheets, steel frame, machines humming. Her hands, aged. Her skin, thin and spotted. A nurse beside her jolted with surprise. You're awake, the nurse said, trembling. You've been under a long time. Marla blinked. The mirror was gone. So was Mammer. So were the knots. She sat up slowly, her body frail. Where am I? She asked, voice rasping like old paper. St. Astor's, the nurse said. Palliative care. You. She hesitated. Your file said you were in a coma for 3 months. But the doctor, they thought you were farther. Marla looked down at her hands. She was old, so old. But something inside her was new. Something freshly remembered. On her nightstand, a jar, sealed, empty, no mist, just a single black thread, curled at the bottom, taped to the jar, a note, her own handwriting. Do not open. Do not knock. If she needs you, she'll know your name. The lights above her flickered. Only once. A single breath, held and released by something elsewhere. Marla closed her eyes and listened in the silence. She waited for the next knock. Marla didn't sleep that night. She pretended to, for the nurse's sake. Closed her eyes, slowed her breathing, but inside, her mind ticked like a wound clock, each gear grinding against the others, unsure if it had been rewound too far or just enough. The jar on her nightstand sat perfectly still. No light caught the glass. It seemed to absorb it. The thread inside didn't move, but Marla could feel it, watching, waiting. It wasn't menacing. It was ready. The nurse came and went. Morning became afternoon, and afternoon folded into evening without edges. Time in St. Astor's moved like honey left on a cold spoon. Slow, inevitable, and just a little wrong. The hallway lights buzzed all night, faintly, constantly, and every hour or so, she thought she heard something. Not voices, not footsteps, knocking, always faint, always from somewhere she couldn't place. Once, she heard it beneath the bed, once inside the pillow, once, softly, from a mirror in the bathroom, where her reflection didn't quite meet her gaze. She stopped checking. Marla had been awake too long to pretend sleep was safe. Instead, she began writing. Not letters, not thoughts, names. Each time a name floated up in her memory, she wrote it down on the back of her meal slips. Aunt Nora, Miss Winsley, Joseph from 3rd grade, the woman with no feet from the hallway in her dreams. And one name she didn't remember learning, but knew how to spell with perfect clarity. Mammer. That one, she underlined. The jar stayed still, but the black thread inside had changed shape. It now curled in the shape of the door handle. Marla didn't touch it. Not yet. Not when the staff changed shifts. Not when the TV in the corner whispered static at 3:17 a.m. Not even when the other patient in the room, a silent man who hadn't moved in 2 days, suddenly sat up and said, "She's almost done sewing," then lay back down and began to cry without sound. Marla waited until the 4th night, when the walls of St. Astor's began to hum, not with machines, not with air conditioning, with voice, not one, many, faint, layered, like a choir tuning beneath the earth. She sat upright, reached for the jar. The thread was no longer in the shape of a handle. It was now a needle, pointed, ready. There was no note anymore, only dust where the paper had been. The jar's lid slid off in her hand, though she hadn't twisted it. The thread rose, hovered, then plunged downward into her lap, into her chest, into something deeper than tissue and bone. It didn't hurt. It stitched. She could feel it lacing pieces of her together. Pieces that had been unfastened years ago. A whimper escaped her lips. Not fear. Relief. The kind that feels like being named in a crowd after too long alone. She looked down, and there on her skin, a seam, thin, black, running from the base of her throat to her sternum. Still warm, still moving. Her room light flickered once. And then, a new door, not one she could see, one she could feel, just to the right of her hospital bed, where no wall should be. It pulsed with breath. Marla turned toward it. She did not rise. She did not walk. She folded again, her body compressing, agreeing, remembering, and passed through. On the other side, her childhood kitchen, smaller than it had been, the table too low, the ceiling curved slightly, like the inside of a mouth. Someone was standing at the sink, back turned, humming, not a song, a stitch, up, down, pulled, not. Marla approached. The figure didn't move. Its skin was the color of paper left in sun. Its hair was thread. Its back bore a pattern, like a dress form, lines and loops marked for cutting. It turned around. No face. Only two buttons where eyes should be. Its mouth was sewn shut, but still smiling. It raised one long finger and pointed the floor, where a child sat, curled into a tight ball, covered in dust, wearing a shirt with a faded cartoon bear. Marla's old shirt. The child didn't speak, didn't blink, but she slowly opened one hand. Inside, a matchbox, not for fire, for keeping things. She offered up. Marla took it. The box felt heavy. She slid it open. Inside, a key, a tooth, and a scrap of paper with the words, "This is where you knock last. Don't forget to knock back." The seam on her chest tugged slightly. She nodded, turned, and walked back through the doorway that wasn't there, back into St. Aster's. The jar on the table was gone. The nurse stood in the doorway, pale and trembling. You vanished," she whispered. "Just for a second, but your bed was empty." Marla smiled, a quiet smile, a seam gently tightening along her throat. "I was just remembering something," she said. That night, she dreamed a hallway made entirely of her own thoughts, and at the far end, a door she hadn't built. Not yet, but soon. Marla woke to silence. True silence, the kind that presses in from every direction, like the room itself is waiting for your next breath before deciding whether to let you keep it. St. Aster's had vanished. No walls, no ceiling, just soft black and the faint impression of bedding beneath her. She sat up. Nothing creaked. Nothing stirred. The air felt as though it had never been breathed. Ahead of her, suspended in the dark like a portrait hung in ink, was a door. It was small, child-sized, made with the color of rain. Knobs on both sides. One brass, one black. The key she found in the matchbox lay on the floor in front of it, neatly placed as though someone had swept the void and positioned it just so. Marla stood. She was neither old nor young. Her body held no pain, no scars, but her chest seam was still there, stitched shut like a letter waiting to be opened. The key pulsed once, faintly. She knelt and picked it up. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, from familiarity. She had done this before, in dreams, in echoes, in the moments between waking and forgetting. Marla reached for the brass knob, but the door rattled. Softly, a warning. She paused. Then, tentatively, she reached for the black knob. It stilled. Accepted. The key turned, and the door opened inward, not into another room, into herself. The world beyond the threshold was her own body. Turned inside out, a cabin of old thoughts, forgotten nights, discarded dreams. She stepped through and fell forward, not down. Within, the descent was slow. She passed the first memory. A blanket fort lit by a flashlight, whispering into it alone to keep the night outside. Then another, a mirror in the hallway that never showed her face at night. And another, her mother crying at the sink, but not sobbing, laughing, and in the laughter, a line Marla had never recalled until now. Sometimes I think she's not mine, just borrowed from somewhere else. The fall ended with a hush. She landed on a soft floor of paper. Thousands of crumpled notes surrounded her. She picked one up. I dreamt I woke up and something else had finished my thoughts. Another, my teeth come out when I sleep. Someone always puts them back. Another, don't trust the lullaby. It doesn't belong to you anymore. In the center of the room stood a pedestal. On it, a book, bound in thread. No title. She approached, opened it. Inside, her entire life. Not written in words, but in knots. Small ones for ordinary days. Tight ones for grief. Frayed ones for fear. Loose ones for denial. On the last page, a loose thread. No knot, just a question. Would you rather forget? She closed the book, and everything around her snapped tight. Suddenly, she was in her room again at St. Astor's. Daylight, voices in the hallway, a lunch tray near her bed. But something was off. The walls, it seems now. Faint lines like the folds of paper, like the entire room had been folded into shape for her benefit. She looked at her hands. Thread ran along each knuckle, just beneath the skin. She could feel it, not painful, but true. The nurse entered, smiling faintly. Good morning, Marla. But her eyes were buttons. She didn't seem to notice. Marla nodded politely. Morning. The nurse walked across the room, placed a glass of water down, and whispered, She's proud of you. Do you remember the knock before the door? Marla stared. The nurse turned. The seam along her back slowly tightened and vanished as she walked away. Marla sipped the water. It tasted like bread. That night, she dreamed again, but not of dark, not of fear, of quiet. The kind of quiet that comes only after something has finished watching you. In the dream, a house stood at the end of a long road. The road was made of names, and at the door stood the Stitch Girl, no longer waiting, no longer wanting, just watching. And when Marla approached, the girl simply said, She left the next knock inside you. You'll know when it's time. Marla looked down. The seam in her chest pulsed. Once. A gentle hello. Days passed, but not as days should. Each morning, Marla woke to changes. Small ones. Deliberate. The glass of water would be warmer than before. The seams on the wall tighter. The nurse would use different hands. Thin and long one day, blunt and square the next. But she never asked questions, because she already knew the answers. She had swallowed them, one by one. Each night, the dreams returned, less like sleep, more like instructions whispered in thread. They taught her how to see through curtains, how to hear without ears, how to knock without hands, and how to tell when the door that answered wasn't really a door. On the seventh day, the mirror above the sink in her room cracked, not shattered, just a perfect circular break, as if a knuckle had gently tapped the inside. That same night, a folded piece of paper appeared beneath her pillow. No handwriting, just a mark. 3 loops tied around a center knot. Mammer's mark. Marla didn't flinch. She unfolded it and felt something shift in her mouth. A name, long buried, one she hadn't spoken in years. It rose like a splinter from her tongue, and when she whispered it, quietly, to no one, the lights flickered. Every light in St. Astor's. The hallway, the nurse's station, even the parking lot flood lamps outside the window, all blinked once, like 1,000 eyes opening inward. She lay back down, the paper pressed over her heart. The seam on her chest twitched. A warm bloom from the stitch line, spreading up to her jaw, into her eyes. She blinked, and the room was different. Still hers, but the edges now ran too long. The ceiling was higher. The window led to nothing, and someone sat at the foot of her bed, wearing her face, but not her expression. The stitched version again, but this time the threads had unraveled. The eyes were open, wide, black, not empty, reflective. In them, Marla saw dozens of moments. Herself at 4, burying a music box under a tree and telling the ground it was to keep the sound safe. Herself at 16, watching her reflection blink out of time for the first time and saying nothing. Herself last week, choosing not to open the jar. The stitched one opened her mouth, a voice like folding silk. You said the name. Now it knows where to look. Marla sat up. The seam along her chest opened slightly. No blood, just light, dim, golden. It formed letters in the air. Not a name, a request. Let me back in. Marla hesitated. She remembered everything now. What she had been before the first knock, what she had lost after the mirror split, and what Mammer had shown her between folds. The stitched girl leaned closer and whispered, "There are no more doors, only the things we keep outside them." And with that, the girl placed something on the bedsheet between them. A box, not like the matchbox. This one was large, wood, smooth, no hinges, covered in scratches, not claw marks, fingernails, desperate ones, a dozen hand sizes, maybe more. Marla touched the lid, the box side, a soft, pleading sound. She opened it. Inside, face, not severed, not sculpted, a living face, eyes closed, lips trembling. It was hers, not as she looked now, as she had looked when she first heard the knocking years ago. 10, maybe 11, still whole, still unaware, still capable of forgetting. The stitched girl spoke again. We locked it away. But forgetting doesn't make it less real. It just makes the knock louder. Marla nodded. There were no questions left to ask. She reached into the box and pressed 2 fingers to Face's closed eyes. The seam along her chest opened fully, and the face began to dissolve into light, thread by thread, returning. She felt it enter her, not like a possession, like a reunion, like coming home to a self you hadn't spoken to in decades. Her breath caught, not in fear, in recognition. The light settled into her veins, and the stitched girl smiled, not with triumph, with relief. She stood and bowed, then walked toward the far wall, where a new seam had appeared. She pulled it open like a curtain. Beyond it, the house from her dreams. Only now it pulsed with breath, lived, waited. The stitched girl turned back once, her button eyes glinting. You remembered enough to sleep now. But when you wake, she'll be waiting for the rest. The seam closed. Marla lay back down. The lights dimmed. The world softened. And just before she drifted, a single, distant knock. The knock echoed like it came from beneath her skin. Not sharp, not urgent. A patient knock. Marla opened her eyes. She was still in the hospital bed, but not St. Astor's. Not anymore. This room was smaller, cramped almost. The corners curved inward, too symmetrical, like someone had built it from memory, not measurements. The floor line was gone. The machines had stopped beeping, and the jar, once empty, now sat upright on the nightstand again. Inside it, the black thread had grown, not longer, denser, braided now, thick as rope, twisting in a slow, breathing spiral, etched into the glass in some impossibly fine script. Thread in, thread out, never wake the double mouth. Marla didn't understand the words, but her body did. It flinched, deep in her gut, like a pulse that wasn't hers. She sat up, the seam across her chest tingled. The thread inside her pulsed in rhythm with the one in the jar. A low hum filled the room, not from the air, from the mirror. It had changed. It no longer showed her reflection. Instead, a stairwell, narrow, spiral, descending, lit by lamps that flickered in no consistent pattern. A small brass plaque had appeared at the base of the mirror, bolted into the glass itself. Wake not by light, but by name. She stood. Her feet found the floor easily. No stumble. She was ready. The mirror yielded to her touch like water. Cool and thick. She passed through, down the stairwell. Each step whispered a forgotten word. Begin. Borrowed. Threaded. Still. Split. Again. At the base of the stairs. A door. Round. Windowless. Built from old, rotting books tied together with surgical wire. A message carved into the center read, "To wake her, you must become the other name." Marla pressed her palm to the door. The seam in her chest bloomed, threads loosening slightly, unraveling just enough to let through a single thought. A memory not hers. A girl in a different skin, running through hallways that folded as she moved, hiding from a voice with no mouth, writing her name over and over until the letters no longer looked right. The door opened. Inside, a room of tongues, hundreds, maybe thousands, pinned to the walls with thin silver nails, still twitching, still humming. Each one spoke in a whisper Marla couldn't quite understand, but together they sang a single tone. High, steady, unsettling. In the center of the room, a crib, not like before. This one was empty, no child, just a mirror at the bottom, cracked, and written on the glass in condensation. She never had a name. She used yours. Marla knelt. The seam in her chest opened wider, and from it rose light, but also shadow, a folded thing, still half asleep. It unfurled slowly, taking the shape of something like a person, but unfinished. Limbs made of curtain fabric, face sewn with whispers, hair like loose thread still seeking the needle. The thing looked at Marla, tilted its head, then reached into its own chest and pulled out a slip of paper. It handed it to her. A single word, Corette, a name. Marla blinked. The air around her shifted. The tongues on the wall stopped humming. Every last one fell silently, landing like leaves on the stone floor. The thing in front of her, Corette, nodded once, then walked into her. Not past, not through, into, like a second skin she had forgotten to wear. The light around her pulsed. Her body remembered something older than sleep, a name not spoken aloud in decades, a shape she had never truly finished growing into. And when her mouth opened, the voice that came out was layered. Marla, Corette, the stitched, the dreamer, all speaking together. I am the knock and the answer. I am the thread and the fray. I remember now. And the crib caught fire. No heat, just light. And in that fire, the faint outline of the final door. Not built, not shaped, but promised. The flames whispered, not crackling wood, not burning cloth, but whispers layered liquid, like old voices spilled through a funnel. Marla stood within them, untouched. Her new skin, Corette's skin, her forgotten skin, welcomed the fire, absorbed it. Each flicker etched meaning across her arms and throat in dark. Curling lines that faded as soon as she tried to read them. The crib melted, not down, inward, folding like paper pressed into the shape of absence. And where it had been, the final door rose. It wasn't made of wood, or glass, or bone. It was made of names, layered names. Yours, hers, theirs. Some still breathing, some long buried beneath floors no one had walked since childhood ended. Marla approached. The door rippled slightly, uncertain whether it had been finished yet. It had no knob, no keyhole, no markings, only the faint outline of two handprints, one above the other. She placed her hands there, felt the pressure of the unseen latch, felt the door ask, not in words, but in promise. Do you know who you are now? Do you know who we are now? Behind her, the whispering flames extinguished without smoke. The light dimmed. Only the thread inside her continued to glow, a single warm line stitched along her spine, pulling gently, inviting her to unravel. Marla closed her eyes. She remembered the knock at age 9, when no one was home, the mirror that never blinked until she did, the voice in the hospital, saying her bed was empty for a second, the stitched girl who never asked for help, only offered a turn. She pressed harder into the door. The handprints sunk inward, and it opened, not with sound, with absence. All noise stopped, all feeling paused. And then, everything. The final room wasn't a room. It was a lake. Endless, flat, silent. Surface like glass. Beneath it, 100,000 cells. Floating, dreaming. Some she recognized. Most she didn't. Each one held a thread in their mouth. Black, wet, nodded. And on the far shore stood Mammer. Not smiling. Not watching. just being. She wore no buttons this time. Her face was blank, smooth, pale as thread left in milk. In her hand, a single needle, long, silver, too bright for the dark. She raised it and pointed to the water, to Marla's reflection, just beneath the surface. This one wasn't broken, wasn't stitched. It was still, waiting. Marla stepped forward, onto the lake. It did not ripple. It accepted her feet as if it had always been her path. Each step drew her closer to her reflection, to her beginning, to the thing she left behind in the knock. And as she stood above it, her chest seemed open one final time. No thread inside, only light. Mammer spoke. First words, first voice, soft as a lullaby not meant to be heard. To remember yourself is to lose the lie that kept you warm. Now that you've woken, you will sleep. And with that, she pressed a needle into her own chest and unraveled. The thread spilled into the water. The lake turned silver. The reflections smiled. Each one, all of them, not wide, not eerie, peaceful. They closed their eyes and began to sink quietly into the water. Marla's reflection looked up at her and opened its mouth. No sound came out, but she understood. It was saying her name, the one she hadn't used yet. She stepped forward, knelt, and kissed the surface, and felt herself slip beneath it. The lake accepted her. No fear, no resistance, no scream, just surrender, just home. And when the water closed above her, the knocking stopped.